Today I want to talk about one finance hack that the banks likely aren't going to tell you about. So just this week my wife's decided it's time to upgrade the family home and move into something bigger. And as they say, happy wife, happy life. So we're now in the process of juggling around our finances and working out how we're going to make that happen. And we come across one tool that I want to talk about today that likely your bank's never mentioned as an option to you. And this is an equity swap. So I want to discuss what that is, how that works, and how you can use that to your advantage. As always, not a tax advisor, not a finance broker. This is just something that we've done personally and could be an option to you. So speak to your professionals, make sure you're getting the right advice before seeing if this product or this sort of system could work for you. Now, we own a couple of properties and whenever we go to refinance or purchase something different, it's always a bit of a musical chairs to what we can pull equity out of, what we'll use cash for, and how we go about financing them. It's always a little bit of a challenge, and that's something that investors will see time and time again, especially as their portfolio grows. The challenge of refinancing becomes harder. Now, one thing I'm doing is I'm doing a 200-day goal. So from filming this video today, it's 200 days until Easter. Now, I've set myself a sales target, and that's one thing I'm doing to boost my serviceability. And that's something, you know, if you work for someone, you might be able to ask for a pay rise. Doing something to increase your serviceability is obviously going to help, but today we're talking about equity and how you can access this equity and that little finance hack, which is an equity swap, and how we're going about that. So essentially, at the moment, we're going to be looking at the three properties that we're going to be playing with. These three properties are properties that one I've owned for a little while, one we bought this year, and this one is the one that we're going to hunt and are looking for. We don't know what sort of price range. We sort of have a rough idea of price range, but we don't know exactly how much it's going to cost. But we're looking to free up as much equity as possible to use as our deposit. Now, property one at the moment, this property we're going to sell. Now, this property has two loans against it. The original loan of when I purchased it, and a secondary loan that we actually used as a deposit for property number two. So when we bought this second property, we actually took out a second loan against the first property to access that equity and be able to use that equity for that purchase. This essentially meant that we bought this property number two, without actually putting any of our own money into the deal, and we just use the equity out of property number one. Now, the problem with this comes when we look to sell property number one, we essentially have to clear both the loans with how it's set up at the moment. So to clear both those loans, this property is really only worth about 150. So we're going to end up having to pay out both those loans, and it's not actually going to leave us a lot of equity to put into the dream home. So what we're looking at doing is doing an equity swap. So rather than this $32,000 being tied against property one, we're actually going to swap the security, what that loan's tied against to, and move it over to property number two. Now, the beauty of this is if you do have more than 80% equity, more than 80% LVR, so that's loan to value ratio, you can do this without having to undergo a full finance application and the fees involved in that. So this property here is worth around 150,000. By tacking that 32,000 to the 81, the total value of the loan against the value of the property, it stays under the 80% LVR ratio, and essentially we can swap that property over, this loan over from property one to property two without having to remortgage the properties, without having to do a full finance application, and without undergoing those fees. The fee to do the equity swap is very minimal in the grand scheme of things. So what that does, once that 32,000 is moved over to property number two, we can then sell property number one, and say it sells for 150,000, we will then be able to pocket 53,000 to put towards a deposit for the third property, and we do not need to pay out this loan, as it will then be held against this property. Now, a couple of things worth noting here. In regards to taxation, it's the purpose of the loan, not what it's secured against. So this $32,000 loan, even though it was tied against property one, was always a tax write-off for property two, as the purpose of that loan was to buy property two. So it's important when looking at loans and looking at shifting loans to realise it's the purpose of the loan. If we'd sold this property, cleared out both of those debts, we then couldn't borrow the extra $32,000 against this property to buy this property, as the purpose of the loan would be for our primary place of residence and not the investment property. So a little bit musical chairs there. I hope with these illustrations it makes sense of what we're doing. Now there's a couple of other reasons that you may do an equity swap. So say your income's changed since you borrowed last and you're wanting to sell one property and buy another property, and those properties are of similar value. You might find you might not actually qualify for the same loan that you have at the moment. So one way to get around this is to do an equity swap. So essentially move the loan security from the property that you own at the moment to the one you're buying. Now, two ways you can do this. One is a contemporaneous settlement. That means the purchase of your new property happens at the same time as the sale of your existing property. The loan stays the same, providing the LVR matches up, and essentially just the security changes. So there's no new loans drawn down, just the security swaps from one to another. So that's a contemporaneous settlement. That's when the purchase of one property settles at the same time that your existing property sells. The other way to do it is to put the funds of the loan into a term deposit. Now some banks will allow you to do this. Sell one property, put those funds in a term deposit so you actually can't touch them. And then when you purchase your next property, you can draw from that term deposit and down and use that funds to pay for the next property. And this can save loan establishment fees. So an equity swap is one way of doing this, and it is a powerful tool that most banks and brokers won't actually tell you about. So keep it in mind next time you're looking at refinancing, buying properties, selling properties, you may be able to use your existing loan and just swap over the equity. Now, if you have enjoyed this video, I recently did a video with a local Cairns broker here, Phil Collins. I'll tag to that video. Go check it out. It has some great content in it. Otherwise, guys, if you have enjoyed this, make sure you subscribe. We bring out a lot of content on this channel, and look forward to talking to you soon.